Alright guys, so welcome to today's video, and in today's video we will deal with functions within Roblox. And so let me just tell you right at the start, we will not deal with every aspect regarding functions because there is still some stuff I will explain in future episodes, okay? So do not worry, we will of course deal with everything at the end of the series. Okay, so let me just start with this short presentation right here again, and with the first note, which, offers a definition of a function, okay? So a function is nothing else than a set of code, okay? So we have a defined set of a certain code which has a certain task, okay? Which does certain things after it has been run. For example, it might change some properties of a certain instance. Okay, so just an example. And let me move on with the second note. Okay, so how can you identify a function and what are the characteristics of a function? And first of all, I have already told you that a function needs to be defined. Okay, so somewhere within your script, there is a certain part in which you define the function, and everything regarding the definition of a function will be dealt with later on in the presentation. Okay, so I will later on show you how to define a function and what you really need to take care of when defining a function. Also, some other characteristics regarding the execution of a function is that you can either call them manually or call them through an event, okay? And I will only show you how to call them manually in this episode, because everything regarding events and functions are topics for future episodes, because in my opinion they are related to another topic which would just increase the amount of time in this video and would just cause some confusion to you. Therefore, we will deal with them in future episodes. Also, a function can be called multiple times, so do not think that after calling one function, you're unable to call it ever again, okay? So you are able to call it multiple times after you have called it once, okay? So that's no problem. Okay, now, to the definition of a function. So how can you define a function? And there we go. So you might have seen this in some other scripting videos of mine, but also of other YouTubers. And a function, of course, contains the term function, so I have put this local in brackets because that's another topic. Once again, we will deal with that in hopefully the next episode or maybe in a future episode. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to explain anything to it just to prevent confusion. So you have the term function, which is, of course, very, very important to tell the script that, hey, we are now defining a function. So function and then the name of the function. Let's say that you have a function which deals with the transparency of a certain instance. So we would have function transparency, and transparency has the name, of course. So function transparency. And then you would have, so right after the name, you would have some brackets. So 2 brackets, and you need to enter some parameters inside of those brackets, okay? And what are parameters? So parameters are basically variables which you give to the function, and the function is now able to work with them. So it might sound very, very theoretical to you, but I'll demonstrate to you this later on. Okay, and we have one more thing which might be very useful when it comes to functions, which is return. So you can write the term return within a function, and then the function itself returns something. And as you can see, you need to write the thing it is supposed to return right after you have written return. Okay, so it might be very confusing to you if you read it out, but I'll show you later on what I've actually meant with this note right here. So after writing return, you're not able to run any code anymore, okay? So return should be the last thing within your function because you're not able to run anything else after return. So if the script goes to the return line, it actually returns out of the function and returns something to the script or to the spot in which you have called the function. Okay, so those notes might seem a little bit confusing to you, but do not worry, we will now go through them with our examples right here. Okay, so I'm gonna keep those notes open because I need to take a look at them myself. Okay, so let's start off with the definition of a function. Okay, for those purposes we will need to insert a local script. I hope that you guys know how that works. Okay, and now we have our print hello world right here, and you guys should know what this hello world does or what this line does. Okay, now let's move on with defining a function. And we have said that the most important thing when it comes to defining a function is that you write function itself as a term, because this tells the script that everything which follows after this is related to creating a function. Okay, so function, and then the second thing was the name of the function, and it is important that you do not use any sort of string characteristics, so do not use any quotation marks or anything to define a name. So putting a name for a function is something like this. So you can just do something like this. Okay, so without any quotation marks or anything, so just write out the name as you would. Okay, so this counts as a function name. And now we have those brackets right after the name. And as you can see, when you add those brackets, your name turns yellow in this case because my studio is in dark mode. And we have those brackets now. And as the presentation has already told you, you're now supposed to fill in some parameters instead of those brackets. And adding parameters is not a must, okay? So it is pretty useful, but it is not a must. So let's just work without parameters. For a first step right here, because parameters can be a little bit confusing if you haven't dealt with functions so far. And so that's actually it. So that's how you define a function. Okay, so the function of course lacks of code inside of here. So the code which belongs inside of a function is of course inside of the function itself. So the starting point of a function is characterized through this function transparency whatsoever, so through this first line we have already defined. And the ending point of a function is defined through this and, okay? So you should keep out an eye for those two components. Okay, and we can now write some code instead of that function. So what have we already learned through the last episodes? Of course, we could possibly print out something. So let's print out function works. Okay, let's test this out and let's hope that this works. And for those of you who have already paid close attention to the presentation, you should know that this is of course not going to work out, because what was one of those characteristics? So it needs to be defined. Okay, that's true. And the other things were that they are being called manually, either manually or through an event, and that they can be called multiple times, means the aspect of calling the function is totally missing in this case. Therefore, we need to call this function. So how can you call this function? It is pretty easy once again. So if you want to call this function, then you need to write out the name of the function, which is highlighted with this yellow text. So transparency, and then transparency, and then two brackets. So that's the way and how you call functions. And we can now test this out and see that it works fine. So function works is supposed to be print out, as you can see. That works. Okay, so that's all about calling them manually. We will not deal with calling them through an event, because that's another topic. And you can also call them multiple times. So I could call this function once again after it has been called once already. yeah, as you can see, this has been printed out 2 times. Okay, so let's move on with the parameters and then with some more examples. And then after that, we will deal with the term return within this context, okay? So, how can you use parameters? And before we move on with the use of parameters, I would like to work on one more example regarding the use of this function, which is which has to do with maths, okay? So print can also print out some results of a mathematical task. So for example, 2 plus 2 is 4. Minus 1, that's all right. Yeah, so as you can see, 2 plus 2 as a operation is being printed out as 4. So the result, of course. And yeah. So we could now do the following, okay? So we could call this function calculator, okay? And let's remove those calls. And we can now replace those two 2's with numbers. So now we deal with parameters, okay? So we could, for example, use number 1 as the first parameter, and then number 2. Wait, what is happening? Okay, number 2 as the second one. Okay, so we have now 2 parameters, and the thing is that those 2 are empty, okay? Because let me explain you why they're empty. Because they need to be because the function needs to be called first of all. So consider these 2 parameters as variables, which receive their value after they have been called. So let me call this function called calculator. So calculator 2 and 3, or 2 and 2. Okay. So if you take a deep look, you have the name of the function and then those brackets. And as we have already got to know, within those brackets you place the parameters. So number 1, aka your first parameter, 2 as the first parameter as well. So number 1 becomes 2 because that's how it is within this call, okay? And therefore number 2 becomes 2 as well, because that's a number within this call. You could also change this to 4, and then number 2, or your second parameter, would become 4 as well. Okay, and now let me show you how you can use those parameters within your function. So you could now just replace those 2 numbers with those variables or parameters in this context. So they're nothing else than just basic variables, but in this context parameters, because they are being defined right here. And yeah, we can now call this function multiple times once again. And let me just change the parameter. So that's the first parameter, that's the second one. And you might ask, well, how can I keep them apart? How do I know which number is the first one and the second one? So how do I know that? And it is pretty easy. So of course, that's the first parameter you read after those brackets. So the first one, and those 2 are being kept apart through this comma. So 1, or the first parameter, and then because of this comma, the second parameter, and we could also add a third parameter called number 3. Okay, but yeah, we could do that, and we could also add a third parameter, a fifth, and so on. So as you like, and yeah. So we have now called this function 3 times, and it will always use different parameters, and therefore we will always have a different outcome. So the first outcome is 6, the second one 11 and 9. All right. So I hope that you have understood the topic around parameters. And yeah. All right. And I wanted to go through some other examples, but I don't think that this is necessary anymore because I only wanted to demonstrate some, yeah, operations such as plus. We can also do the same for minus, or we can also multiply those parameters together. As you can see, this works as well. Or we could also multiply them together, divide them, whatsoever. So it is up to you. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Now, another thing I would like to deal with in this video is about the return, or the term return, okay? So, we will keep our parameters right here, and we will keep this calculator example, and we will now deal with the term return. Okay, so let me show you how the term return can be used in this context. So we have already pointed out that return returns something and marks the end of the function, okay? So after I write return, you cannot write something like print hello, this function still goes on, although there is a return above me. So you are unable to write this because the return marks the end of the function, okay? All right. So how can you return something in this context? So if we stay in the context of a calculator, we could do the following. So we could do this. Calculating. Okay. So just to tell the output that we are calculating, and then we are going to return the result. So if we assume that this calculator can only calculate plus operations, so number 1 plus number 2, then we would return the result of this calculation, okay? So that's the way and how you return something. So you just write return, and then whatever it is supposed to return. You can also return 12, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatsoever. So you can return whatever you like. You can also return strings, characters, booleans, so false, true, decimal numbers. So you can return anything you want to. You can also return instances, so variables, objects. So you could possibly return script.parent as well if you want to. Well, in this context, that makes less sense, but you can return objects as well, okay? And we can really return everything. You can also return brick colors, okay? So something we have learned about in the last episode. You can also return color free, so something we have learned about in the last episode as well. And yeah, so there is pretty much everything you can return, okay? So you can return many things. And in this context, as I've already told you, we want to return the result of this calculation, okay? So that's all about return. So you write the term return and then something you would like to return. All right, but how do you actually receive what you want to return, okay? So writing return is not enough. You need to receive what you want to return. So how do you do that? And for this context, it is important to know what you want to do with the return you receive. So do you want to print it out, or do you want to use it for something else? Okay, because there are functions which return something which is useful for other code, okay? So I do not have any examples now for them, but there are there are these kind of codes. But if we stay with the example that you only want to print out the result or the return, then you could possibly do this. So print, and then call this function within a print. Of course, do not forget about the parameters. So that's the way on how you would print out the return. So you need to consider it as this. So this right here, okay, this expression, so this call is the same as this. Okay, so this represents the return at the end. So if I would return this hello world, then this would be hello world, okay? Right? And just to demonstrate to you that this is the case, I'm gonna run the code, and as you can see, we have some parameters right here, and since we are not using them in any way inside of this code, nothing will happen. Okay? And in the second case, we are going to print out hello world. Yeah, as you can see, that's what is happening. And yeah, so that's actually it for return as well. Just one more thing. So this was one case I've just mentioned. I have also mentioned another case regarding storing, or no, regarding the return of objects. Okay, so if you want to store a certain return, then you can also do the following. So you can also define a variable called, yeah, in this case, return storage, and then you can call the function as well. Okay. Yeah. So we are of course unable to prove this, but we could possibly prove this by printing out the variable which receives the return of this function. Okay, so that's a way on how you can prove that the variable actually stores the return. And yeah, so that's it. So that's it with the topic around functions, and it is up to you to find out in what kind of ways you can integrate functions within your project. Okay, so functions can be used in many ways. There are also functions inside of tables, or there are also different cases in which you can call functions as well. But I just do not want to confuse you, okay? So I'm glad that you want to learn about scripting, and I'm glad that you might understand the basics, okay? And that's fine. So scripting is a process, and or it is about progress, okay? So you cannot expect yourself or you to understand everything right away. So it is a progress, and you just learn step by step. All right, with that being said, guys, thank you for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, share this video to all of your friends, and take care. See you in the next video, guys.